Hi, this is Margaret Meloni, and welcome to the Death Dhamma Podcast. Together we will consider life, death, and impermanence. Because in between birth and death, we lose things. Not just our glasses and our keys. We lose identities, relationships, ideas, and more. But what we can gain right now is facing this together, and we will gain freedom, peace, and progress on our path. Everyone, welcome to this special bonus episode of the Death Dhamma Podcast. And as a special treat today, I'm bringing you someone who understands the energies of our bodies and understands Buddhism. And her name is Michaela Daystar. And I'm going to hand it to her because she can do such a better job of explaining to you the talents that she has and the beautiful work that she does. So welcome, Michaela, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Margaret. I am a Reiki teacher and practitioner, and I really love to work with people who are very committed to their contribution to the world and who understand that that contribution is best made from the inside out. And so I support people in really coming to understand themselves more intimately through the practice of Reiki, and in particular teaching that practice through the perspective of its Japanese origins, which include a Shingon Buddhist foundation. And that work has really grown out of a previous career working with students and nonprofits, helping them to develop their social justice capacities and leadership capacities, and really observing the ways in which people come to that kind of work out of this deep, heartful desire to change the world, but also out of a lot of pain and trauma and brokenness. The ways that they have been hurt by the world fuels that passion. And in a higher ed context, in a nonprofit context, I didn't have a lot of space to address those internal experiences that people were bringing into the work. And so after about 12 years of that work, I opened my business, Heartscapes, and have been really working with folks on that more intimate level ever since.
Okay. And I believe that there is a Heartscapes website. And would you share that with us? Because I think people are probably going to want to go look this up.
Yeah, it's heartscapesinsight, all one word, .com.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you. Now, I'm going to paraphrase something. And this is your opportunity to say yes, kind of, or no, or whatever you want. But I'm feeling like what you're telling us is that you are helping people who can go and make a contribution into the world, which you could almost argue if we all got to a certain point of development, we could all be making contributions to the world. Yeah. And so that you would be helping us get through some of our trauma so that we can clearly make that contribution. Is it fair for me to say that?
Yeah, that's definitely a large aspect of it. And whether or not people identify with carrying trauma, there are, deeply embedded habitual responses and behaviors that are rooted in our fear and our fight or flight responses and our past experiences that limit us and that cause us to feel smaller than we are, that cause us to feel that we're not enough to do what we want to do, or cause us to react to things in ways that are really more rooted in fear than in our passion and what we're really meant to do. And so it's really about clearing all of that out of the way so that you can be your full self in whatever that contribution looks like.
That's beautiful. And I'm going to ask you to give us an even more in-depth description of Reiki, just so that we're all on the same page. It could be that everyone listening is like, Margaret, we know, but I don't know that. So
Yeah. Well, so Reiki is generally understood in the West as an energy-based healing system that comes from Japan. And again, in the West is really primarily focused on a hands-on healing practice. However, that's not really what it is from its origins. From its origins, it is a distillation, it is a simplification of Shingon Buddhism and Shinto practice. It is a pathway to understand ourselves from the inside out, to remember our wholeness, and to ultimately be on an enlightenment path. But really from the perspective of, just right now in this day, in this moment, Can I walk through my life unattached to fear and anger? Can I be rooted in gratitude and in compassion and be true to myself? It is a collection of 5 different elements that each have a variety of practices associated with them, all of them really working together to bring us to those same outcomes. One of those elements is hands-on work, so using touch to work with the body. There's a strong emphasis on bringing the body, mind, and the energy or the breath together, which is known in Japan as Sanmitsu, the 3 mysteries of our body, our mind, and our breath. So aligning those, integrating all of those important aspects of ourselves. And so the different elements of Reiki will touch on those different things, and hands-on healing works explicitly with the body and explicitly with the the healing experience of touch and of connecting with ourselves or another person through touch. And so that's the piece that most people associate with the system of Reiki as a hands-on healing practice.
Yes.
However,
that's what I've seen. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'm like, when you're saying this, like, because once upon a time, I did have someone perform some Reiki on me, and it was great. And I think that now I understand, like, I'll say know of the piece you just mentioned, the hands-on.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful piece, right? I love working with people in that way. I love receiving Reiki in that way, but it's just, one piece of this deeper well, this deeper pool. And so I really love just sharing that with folks, helping people understand the bigger picture and the bigger intention here. I would say that from its origins, the concept of healing is really about coming to understand ourselves, that healing is remembering our wholeness and our true self. And that, in the container of a Reiki session, that can look like our body relaxing pain. It can look like our body, increasing its capacity to deal with physical, emotional, mental distress that we're in. And we can interpret that as healing, right? This process healed me. I would say that's one of the outcomes of the system, but it's not the particular purpose.
So when you talk to me and you were teaching me that you teach Reiki from the perspective of, the Japanese esoteric Buddhist roots, then I think that that's what you're explaining now. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so part of that mind, body, breath, is that part of the roots? That was one of the aspects. I think you said there were 5.
Yeah, so there's 5 elements, and then there's kind of framing concepts. So the Sanmitsu, body, mind, breath, is like a framing concept. The 3 diamonds, which comes from Shinto, which is the 3 energy centers of our body that we work with, that's a framing concept. The 5 elements are firstly precepts, which are very much aligned with the Buddhist Eightfold Path.
Okay.
A collection of 5 precepts, which are essentially a secularization of the Eightfold Path. For historical reasons that we could get into later if you're interested. Then breath work and meditation, then the hands-on healing, symbols and mantras, and then spiritual blessing, or reiju in Japanese. Those are the 5 elements, and then each of those elements has various practices associated.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And then, so I'm curious about something. So when you work with someone, like if I were to come to you and ask you for Reiki healing, would you teach me all of that, or would it just be something I received because you did it and because you know the elements?
Yeah. Generally speaking, if somebody books a Reiki session, what they're desiring and stepping into is a hands-on healing session. And so in most cases, unless there seems to be a reason based on what the person shares to go into teaching some of these other elements, we're primarily working with the Tenohira, the palm healing, the hands-on healing practice. So the way that I integrate this other perspective and kind of try to provide to them a framework, a concept that is aligned with these origins, is very simple, and largely is around assuring them that any healing that they experience is coming from them. That their body, their mind, their heart, their spirit knows exactly what they need, has the tools and capacity to enact whatever change is needed, or whatever stillness is needed. And that really what I'm doing is collaborating with them to create a space to kind of hold distractions at bay, to give some time and space for their system to do that work that they're already doing, that it's a collaboration, that they are empowered in that healing process. It's not that I am doing something to them that's causing something to happen to them. There's a,
that's a very important distinction.
It is, yeah.
And I don't know a lot about this. And like I said, I worked with one person who worked with me a couple of times, and she was lovely. But so there was a lot I didn't understand, like everything you just said. I mean, I wouldn't have necessarily understood that some of it was coming from within me. I guess I would have felt that she was doing something where she was redirecting my energy field, is what I thought.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the complex thing is that, Reiki came into the United States during a very specific historical moment during the build up to World War II. And there were necessary changes that were made by the woman who brought it into the country via Hawaii, because the United States was not in a position to accept a Japanese spiritual tradition in that moment of history.
Of course.
And so, there were changes that had to be made just for her to be able to do her work. And then as the system spread from her, she taught a lot of people. Her name was Hawaii Otakara. She had many students, many teachers that she taught. And as it, went out into the world and, met with other traditions that were coming into the country at that time, and met with New Age spiritualism that kind of came into popularity in the 1960s, essentially it changed into a completely different system of practice, and kind of got blended and melted in with a lot of other traditions. And so, for example, you have, a very strong presence of the chakra system inside of Western Reiki that was not present in the original Japanese, and lots of other changes. And there's a lot of beauty and value to those Western systems, but they are very different. Yes. And so I really feel like part of my purpose and part of my mission is to make those distinctions clear, because there are conceptual and practical significant differences between those two systems. And you just named one of them, right? The cognitive shift between I am going to somebody who's going to channel energy to me and make changes, within me, and then tell me all about what that means, versus any change that happens is coming from inside of me. It's what my system wants and needs, and I am the one who's going to make meaning of that. Those are two very different ways of approaching an experience.
It sure is, because it really, I'll say, I feel like it impacts whether or not I take ownership of my own healing, or how I take responsibility for my healing. Because if I know that it's coming from within, I feel like I take a stronger sense of guiding myself on my own journey, versus something almost like magical fixing me.
Right.
Pardon for that expression. I didn't know how else to say that.
Well, and as much as I, love my clients and want them to continue to come and want them to get to have the experience of being able to just relax and submit to somebody, creating a nice experience for them, I also want them to not be dependent on me, right? I want them to be able to, go through their life and have resources that can address what comes up in the moment, rather than having to wait until they can schedule a session, right?
Yes.
And so the bulk of my practice really is in teaching, and is teaching people the full system so that they have all of it at their disposal. And
I mean, what you discuss about, I completely understand, because I actually recently visited Hawaii. And so, it was a good reminder of, things that have happened, and what happened to the Japanese in America, even though Hawaii wasn't officially a state at that time, but still it is a good reminder. And also it kind of reminds me of how Buddhism has flowed around the globe since early times, kind of being flexible and malleable into different cultures and systems. And so how Reiki came here, and the changes that needed to be made because of the challenges that the Japanese were facing in the United States at that time, it kind of makes sense. But then, there's always that, this is a discussion for another day, the whole pros and cons of when something molds itself to fit into a culture, what do we lose versus what do we gain, you know?
Exactly. And it's been the strategy of colonized people and oppressed people forever to cloak their culture, right? To disguise it,
Yes.
to hide it so that it can be retained, right? But at a certain point when that threat is no longer present, what responsibility do we have, particularly, the colonizer complected among us, to stand up for reclaiming those origins and to make space for them. And so that's, particularly as a white woman practicing this art, I really feel like it's my responsibility to do that as well as I can, which will never be perfect because I'm not Japanese.
Sure. But you are working to educate us and say, like, look, this is what it really is. This is where it came from. You're not saying that, like you as a white woman in the United States made it up, or that we made it up in the United States. So you are giving it its, proper context and his history. And that, I think, right there is important. Yeah. Because, the whole cultural appropriation thing is a very difficult thing to navigate. I think sometimes we do it and we don't even know we're doing it. So you are not doing it. So that's lovely.
Yeah.
Right. Now, in Buddhism, there's impermanence. That's no surprise to anyone. I'm just segueing into a question because season 2, we talked a lot about impermanence. And so I'm just curious, like, if you were to work on me or anyone, but we'll just make it me because I'm talking to you, right? Is that work subject to impermanence? And like, how does the flow of impermanence show up in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that it shows up in the sense that, again, what we're doing is stepping into the moment, right? Stepping into this particular moment, being open to what is needed in this particular moment, trusting our own system, everybody who's involved in that session to take up whatever is needed, and understanding that change is constant and that in the next moment, something different might be needed, something different might be released and no longer needed. So, while I don't explicitly speak to clients of impermanence, like it's an understanding that's there,
Right.
that, this isn't about fixing all your problems and then they're fixed, because that's not how life works.
That's for sure.
Right. And so
Yes.
if we're trying to hold out, a perspective that, we're going to be able to heal ourselves, period, forever, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment and suffering, right? Rather than that, let's pay attention to this particular moment. What is needed right now? Can we be fully attentive to what's going on right now and trust that what we need is available, and respond accordingly? Not attached to what happened yesterday, not attached to what's going to happen in the next moment, but really right now in this moment, what am I called to?
That makes sense. It's like I should come to you with trust and understanding, to not have my heart and head set on this is what's going to happen today. And you accept me with a thought of how things might go, but with an understanding that when you start to work with me, that changes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes people will, come and say, I have this pain or I have this experience. I want you to work on that thing and fix that thing.
Okay.
And so I have, so I explain all this to them and I say, your system might be ready to work that thing. I am not going to be explicitly working that thing. And you may or may not experience some resolution around that thing. And if that doesn't feel, right for them, if it doesn't feel like that is like if they want a guarantee, then we're just not meant to work together, right? Because again, impermanence is really the water that we're standing in, right?
Yes, exactly, that makes sense. I like that phrase, the water that we're standing in. And I'm just curious, what could I come to you with where I'd say, like, I need you to do this, and you might look and go, no. Is there an example that comes to mind of that kind of a scenario? I'm just curious.
Well, I'm thinking of a particular client from recently, who believed that he had blockages in a particular chakra area.
Okay.
So he wanted that block cleared away.
Okay.
And so, that was something I was like, well, we will work on your whole system and we'll see what happens. It may or may not resolve the thing that you think in your mind is happening.
Mhm.
You might also not be having a blockage in your chakra. It's like we put these
Right.
labels on what we're experiencing that ultimately, I think, limit what actually is possible in a session. When we say, I'm experiencing a blockage in my chakra, I want you to unblock that, as opposed to, I'm experiencing something that I'm curious about, and let's explore that, is how I would invite people to think about it. And for him, he had a very specific goal,
Okay.
and I was able to recommend another practitioner, and hopefully they had a good session.
And that's perfect. And it kind of reminds me of when, like, let's say we have symptoms and we go online and we use our favorite search engine to find out, and then we go to our doctor and we say, oh, I am positive that I have leprosy. And your doctor looks and says, no, you have dry skin. But it's like that, only much more serious. But
Right.
yeah, but it's like that. Yeah. Oh, I'm positive this is what's wrong. And you're like, let's just pause and find out more. Let's find out more. Well, next season, we're going to dive more deeply into attachment. And I kind of feel like this actually sets us up, like I come to you attached with an idea, right? But does attachment show up in my body? And how does it appear to you as the practitioner? Like if you're working with me, and not just like me saying to you, like, my root chakra is dirty, I need you to clean it. If that were like similar to what an example we were just discussing, but like, how does it show up to you, attachment? Can you feel it, see it in me?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I'll start by just explaining kind of how I experience a Reiki session. There are people who have what we might call psychic abilities, or abilities to see energy and read energy. I am not one of those people.
Okay.
So what I experience in a session with another person is, the best way I can describe it is, it feels like we're both stepping into a river together. And
Okay.
we're floating along that river. And that river is moving us each similarly, but a little bit different, because we're having our own experience in the water. The water is connecting us. It's connected to the water that's in each of our bodies. And we're moving along with the current together.
Mm-hmm.
In that experience, I might notice things. I might notice if, your body bumps up against a rock and kind of moves a little bit, or if, the water speeds up at a certain place or pools in a certain place. And I'm just simply noticing those things. I'm not making meaning of them. I'm not ascribing, something that like a prescription about that. I'm just simply noticing what's there. And if folks want to know what I experienced, then that's what I describe. When I was working in this area, I experienced this. When I was working in this area, I experienced that. It's up to them to make meaning of that. So I would say that I'm not reading things in people such as attachments.
Okay.
However, they might interpret that some experience that they're having in the session, or that I am reporting that I had in the session, has to do with their attachments. And then we can explore that, right?
Okay.
Generally, the topic of attachments isn't coming up in those conversations, because it's not something that people necessarily go to. But that topic comes up quite a bit in my classes, because it's part of the framework of how we understand what it is we're trying to transcend, what it is we're trying to clear out of our life, so that we can be our best and true self. So we're working a lot with the concept of attachments and non-attachment in our classes, and really looking at how does that show up in our daily life. One of the most important things to me, particularly when I'm teaching, but also when working with people in sessions, is that we really understand how these concepts, which can be very esoteric, they can be, feel really confusing and irrelevant to our life, like non-duality, for example, or even like attachments. What does that have to do with my life? And so we spend a lot of time really tracking what those things have to do with our life, where we can see our increased suffering because we're attached to something, or where we experienced a sense of freedom or liberation because we let go of that attachment. We track that in small ways, in big ways throughout our day, so that we can really see how these concepts actually do apply and are actually very practical and pragmatic when it comes to moving through our life with resilience and groundedness and spaciousness, which is really the goal that we're up to.
Oh, I love that. Moving through our life with resilience. Say it again. We're moving through our lives with resilience and
Groundedness and
groundedness and spaciousness. That is beautiful. Thank
and
you.
compassion, of course.
Yes, yes. So what tips would you give us to help ourselves when we're not able? Because, and then you did say that, like I might not always be able to come to you right when I'm having an issue. And also the goal eventually is for me to be able to be on my own, right? So what kind of tips would you give us to help ourselves when we're not able to work with you?
So I would say that one of the most important things from the system of Reiki in terms of impacting our daily life is to work with groundedness. We tend to be a very cerebral society. We're in our heads a lot. We really value and reward thinking and, the mind. In a lot of spiritual communities, there's also a lot of emphasis on ascension, on the heavens, on the universe, on all of the upward things. And we don't always spend enough time getting deeply rooted, deeply grounded, creating a strong, stable foundation from which we can then move our attention up and outward. And so much of, for example, the epidemic of anxiety that we see from elementary school kids up to our elders can be addressed with physiologically getting a sense of groundedness. And so the foundational practice within the system of Reiki does exactly that. It's called Joshin Kokyoho, and which translates as a method to focus the mind. It's focusing the mind in the hara, the low belly, the energy center just below the belly button in the center of the body. This is the first diamond in the 3 energy center map that we work with in Reiki. And it is directly connected to earth, to the body, to that sense of groundedness. And so even if one doesn't know the full practice of Joshin Kokyoho, just the practice of bringing our attention down to that place, and it can be helpful to follow the sensation of the breath down into the belly, maybe putting a hand on the belly, just focusing our attention at that point, just below the belly button, deep into the center of the body for 5 breaths, 10 breaths, 15 minutes, an hour, whatever we've got, makes an incredible physiological difference when we are feeling anxious, when we're feeling afraid, when we're feeling spaced out, when we're feeling confused, all of these conditions of being ungrounded. So that would be a very simple tool that anybody can apply at any time.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And, I saw something recently, I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember the whole thing, but it was basically the thought was sometimes we spend too much time looking upward and out, like we're looking up and out for something into the heavens, whatever that term means to someone, to save us, when what we need to be doing is to be looking within. And so I feel like that grounding, when you talk about that diamond, no one can see me except for Michaela right now, but I'm pressing on my belly. Actually, the camera angle, she may not be able to see that, but I'm pressing on my belly because I'm definitely relating to that grounding and that point. Would you tell us what the other 2 diamonds are?
Yeah. So if you think about, I often use the image of a tree, right? So a tree will grow up and out as far and as wide as it has rooted, right? So you begin with that rooting and then you grow up, right? So the second diamond is the head. So we go from the rooted place to the reaching place.
Okay.
And then once those 2 are in harmony with each other, right? So once we have a nice, even, balanced rootedness and reaching, it's in harmony, then we come to the 3rd diamond, which is the heart.
Okay.
And because our heart has the capacity to be so incredibly spacious and to be so incredibly vast and connected to all of life, right? Interconnection, of course, being an incredibly important concept. We need to give it room, right? So we need to give it that strong foundation, and we need to give it lots of spaciousness and openness. So we build those 2 first before coming to the heart, which is associated with connection, interconnection, and compassion. So those are the three diamonds, and that map comes from the Shinto origin story of the universe and the way
Oh,
in which the human body maps onto the universe.
beautiful. Thank you. And is there a particular Buddhist teaching or meditation or mantra or even a chant that you either recommend or that you find personally useful? So that there could be two answers to this, right? There could be like, I recommend this and I use this other thing, or
Yeah, there's several that we use.
uh-huh.
And I teach a quarterly 21-day practice with usually with a mantra of some sort. But the
Mhm.
one that has the most importance to me personally, both because of its direct association with Reiki and because of just how it operates in my life, is the
Mhm.
Furomyo mantra. So the deity of Furomyo is central to Japanese Shingon Buddhist practice. It's the first of 13 Buddhas that's evoked during the funeral rites. And he is the immovable one. He sits on a strong, solid rock foundation. So he
Mhm.
really invokes what I was just describing of
Uh-huh.
building that strong, solid foundation. He is immovable in the face of chaos, of difficulty, of challenge. He holds a sword which cuts away everything that is in the way of us being our true and right self. He's surrounded by flames and phoenixes, which continues to burn off all of the crap that's not our true self, that's in the
Mhm.
way. And he's really embodies that like fierce compassion. Like he just loves
Ah,
it so deeply that he's gonna like do what it takes to get us free of all of our nonsense. So he's one of these Japanese deities that has a really fearsome face with like fangs and frowny
mhm.
face. But it's not hateful or wrathful. It's like fierce, fierce compassion. Um,
Mhm.
and his mantra is really beautiful, and it really invokes in me that all the feeling of all of that I just described. And
Mhm.
and the mantra goes, Na makusa manda bazaranan senda ma karoshana soataya un tarata kanman, and then repeat it over and over again.
That's lovely. Thank you. I love that image of fierce compassion and that understanding that we can see a depiction, right? And it can look frightening at first, but it's really not meant to be frightening. It's meant to convey the caring and the deep passion and concern, and that translates into a fierce face, because maybe we could call it like intense focus on, it's an intense focus that
Yeah.
looks fearsome because it's, I don't know if this is the correct way to say it, because it's fearsome against those who would not be compassionate or who would not choose to experience or lend compassion. I
Yeah.
guess that's how I think of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Now, you mentioned involvement in social justice work. And I would really like to know more about this, as would the rest of the community. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your involvement in social justice work?
Yeah. I would say that I've been involved in social justice work in one way or another
Hmm.
most of my life. But professionally, I worked at several different colleges and universities for about 13 years, specifically working with students to build their capacities and commitments to social justice and in leadership
Hmm.
development capacities. And so that looked like, teaching classes and seminars and connecting them with internships and other community resources,
Hmm.
opportunities for them to put their learning into practice, and just generally supporting them and developing a good foundation for them to go out and do the work that they want to do in the world.
Hmm.
And as I mentioned, I came to understand that my gift, my calling was in
Yes.
working with that internal space, so that they could go out and do that work from a strong, resilient place. But it's been a real journey and a important focus for me to continue to bring a social justice lens into my work with Heartscapes, And
Okay.
that looks a couple of different ways. Firstly, it looks like teaching this work from its Japanese origins, right? To
Uh-huh.
avoid cultural appropriation as much as I can, and to, assert the importance of understanding where a practice like Reiki comes from. It also looks like teaching from a trauma-informed lens. I teach classes for other Reiki practitioners on how to create a trauma-informed space in their practices, so that we can avoid perpetuating trauma unintentionally
Yes.
in our spaces. Um, and it looks like, applying this work in context where people are doing good work in the world.
Hmm.
Making my services available in a wide variety of ways within nonprofits and other organizations, to help with supporting people who are on the ground doing that kind of work.
I think that's amazing. And I do think that people who are on the ground doing the work need solid support systems. And I don't know that they always get them. Some do, but some don't. And, when somebody has that inclination and that talent and that fierce compassion, then it's great that there's someone like you who's going to help keep their cup filled so that they can keep doing that work so that we don't lose them, you know?
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
it's a space that's just ripe with burnout and, you know, people just working themselves to the bone. They're underpaid, they're understaffed, there's not enough people doing the work, too much is expected of them. They're coming at it from deep passion, deep conviction, and they're therefore likely to just keep at it, right, as long as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And it can be very destructive. It can be a cycle that repeats oppressive systems inside of our attempts to deconstruct oppressive systems. And so there's been a
Wow.
lot of awareness of that in the last decade or so, a lot of
Mhm.
work to explicitly name that, to say, hey, we're not going to participate in that anymore. But easier said than done, right? Because the work has to get.
Yes.
So,
That's a good point because in wanting to provide help to these different causes, I think a challenge is that so many of our nonprofits or NGOs in other countries are understaffed and the people are underpaid and then they're working long hours. So you're right, we might be accidentally creating the conditions that we're trying to remedy. Yeah, by creating those ecosystems within the organizations. I can see that. Unfortunately, I can see that. Sometimes I say, when I'm working with people, sometimes I'll say, here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is there are so many areas in the world where people need help that you have lots of causes to pick from. And then also the bad news is there's so many people that need help.
yeah.
And so, I feel like everyone can find a cause. Everyone can find a cause. You might rescue dogs. You might help feed the unhoused. You might help rebuild communities. You do construction. There's an opportunity for all of us to pitch in.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, I am so appreciative of spending time with you, and I want to be, respectful of your time because I don't want to make you one of those, understaffed. I don't want to create that ecosystem wearing you out with
No,
my
I love having
questions.
these conversations.
And I know everyone's loving hearing it too. It's so interesting and helpful. So the question that I like to ask, because I don't always know what to ask everyone. So what should I have asked you that I did not ask you? Or what is something you would like to share that you haven't had a chance to share with us yet?
I would like to share that I'm trying to find the words for the feeling
Mhm.
that's in my mind, right? Because it's like when we have the opportunity to talk to a broad amount of people, right? There's that essence that we want to convey, and it doesn't always come
Mhm.
into words. But I think what I want to convey is that there are simple, accessible, and elegant ways for us to live our lives in a way that is so much more grounded and happy and spacious and whole and well than we often experience.
Mhm.
One of your In one of your previous episodes, you talked about the simplicity of a lot of Buddhist teaching and that the challenge comes in the practice of it, the execution of it.
Right.
And I think that we often in our culture look for complexity. We often look for bigger, more, better, faster, right? And so I think we have a skepticism of simplicity in our culture. I know I had that when I first started studying Western Reiki. I studied more and more complex versions of kind of New Age Western Reiki, and it got more and more tangled, and I just moved more and more away from how I wanted to feel. And it was such a relief when I came to the way that I practice now, in part because it is so simple, so accessible. And then the challenging part is to then work with it diligently over time.
Yeah.
But I think that for me, it would have been in the beginning, it would have felt like a relief to know that there was practices that I could put into play that were so simple. So I think that's what I want to leave with folks, that, you know, simple is often the way to get to depth. So don't be averse to it.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom with us.
Yeah,
It's much
thank you
appreciated.
too, Margaret. Thank you for doing this work. I really appreciate all of the episodes you've brought forward.
You've been listening to the Death Dhamma Podcast with your host, Margaret Meloni. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmeloni.com, margaretmeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.